Welcome to Solutions OP Clinical Trials Podcast. My name is Olga and I'm the Managing Director of Solutions OP. We are a small team of experienced professionals working on clinical trials in the United Kingdom. I'll use our podcast to discuss hot topics in clinical trials and provide analysis of the latest trends and challenges in pharma and medical device industries, not just in the UK but globally. Thank you for listening. Welcome to today's episode of the podcast. Today we are going to discuss a conference which we attended with my colleague Lydia Ainsworth. She's our Senior Data Quality Manager. So we attended a conference in Birmingham on 13th and 14th of April in 2026, which was organized by the Institute of Clinical Research. And it was basically a regulatory conference to tell us about changes in the regulations in the UK. There were representatives from the Ethics Committee, from HRA, from MHRA, all regulators. And there were different also vendors from different commercial companies, of course, who attended the meeting. It was a very good 2-day productive meeting. So I attended the first day, and I'll cover today the first day topics, and my colleague Lydia, she'll cover the second day, which she attended. So it was a very good meeting. So if you want to learn about the changes and what's going on in the UK, I think it's really worth listening to this podcast. It will help you a lot. So the first day, it was more of a meeting with the regulators. So we had attendance from MHRA, from HRA, and we talk about patient involvement. So MHRA part was not only about drugs, but it was also about medical devices, which was very interesting. It was like combined. You can listen about the different, not just drugs, but medical devices too. So the main thing that happened in the UK is, as of 28th of April 2026, we have a new clinical trials regulation. And that was the scope of the top discussion for MHRA about drug studies, because that regulation affects predominantly drug studies, but also medical devices. So it's kind of everything, but maybe in a slightly different way, if I have to put it that way. So it was a very good meeting, as I said. So the first session was a panel discussion about the AI and the use of AI in clinical research. So that session was attended by MHRA representative and some people from private companies and CROs. And they were talking about AI and how AI is used more in clinical research. So as you might know, the regulators are very keen on using AI to streamline the review process of clinical trials applications, and not just clinical trial applications. FDA have implemented that already. They're using AI for reviewing the applications, and MHRA are doing something similar here in the UK. Of course, those who work in the private sector, like CROs, big CROs, they're also very keen on the ability to use AI in terms of reducing the resources and streamlining the process. Now, when it comes to hospitals, it's a bit more complicated. Because as we know, some hospitals in the UK use electronic medical records, but there's still some hospitals that use paper. So that's a bit of a tricky one. And here I'll ask Lydia to join me so I don't bore you with with my things. So Lydia, what is your takeaway from the AI discussion? Maybe about how that could impact the sites, because you have experience, you work with hospitals all the time, you review source data. So do you think, what is your opinion about AI as application in clinical research, using the data?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I thought was interesting was how they talked about the use of AI for task automation, so things like doing quality checks, which obviously is very relevant to what we do. But I think when it's going to, if considering how it's going to be used for that, I think you're always going to have to remain cautious, which is something that they covered, but obviously it's just something to remember that AI can't do everything perfectly all of the time, because we know it can hallucinate, so it can confidently put out a false output, and that could be quite dangerous if it's doing quality checks, particularly for information on that has implications for patient safety. So I think even if we are going to see more AI used a lot more in clinical trials, I think human insight is always going to be needed at some stages, particularly for those quality checks. So I don't think humans are going to be completely replaced by AI, at least not anytime soon. I think another thing that they also mentioned that maybe we are going to see it more taking over is the use of in silico models. So that's something that we discussed in our last podcast as well, about using in silico models, so using AI to predict biological processes and drug interactions. And there's sort of a push to do that a lot more, because we can use that instead of testing on animals, which is obviously cheaper and is sort of more ethically viable. But yeah, so I think obviously we're going to see it probably used in more areas like that, but maybe in other areas it might take a little bit longer because there's extra considerations. Yeah, I'm not sure what you thought.
No, that's absolutely, I agree with you. In silico models, that is something that everyone is very hot at the moment on this topic for in silico models. It's not only in the UK, but the US FDA as well. They're very keen on that and this, and even the European Medicine Agency is also moving into that direction. So we'll see, probably there'll be some guidance coming from them on this. Indeed, we can use it for quality checks, but I think also that was my impression from the regulators. MHRA are also thinking that we still need someone to do the quality check. So it's not going to be just AI doing everything for us and we drink our tea, which would be very nice, actually. So I wish I could do that.
I think our jobs are safe for now, though.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so yeah, for now, you won't be able just to drink your tea. I'm afraid you'll still have to do some work. So that was basically, the key points on the AI session. Of course, this is a very dynamic field, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more development in the near future. So the next important discussion here on that day was about medical devices. So for those of you who are not familiar, there is an ongoing consultation between the UK and USA for recognition procedure for medical devices. So that's something that I was particularly very interested in. So the idea is, if they reach an agreement, medical devices which are approved in the USA will be able to be used in the UK healthcare system. And that's of course is great news, because it will improve and increase the amount of medical devices that we can use. So that's really positive thing. I'm really looking forward to learn more about this. So my question to the MHRA representative was about if there any update on this one. So my understanding from what he said is that they're looking more into post-market considerations rather than preclinical. So basically, if you have a medical device which is already approved in US by US FDA, then it's that recognition procedure could be used, to use it in the UK. But we don't believe at this point, from what he said, that this will include devices which are not approved by FDA. So basically, if you have a clinical trial in the US and you have approval for that clinical trial, clinical investigation, I should say, of course. So if you have that clinical investigation approved in the US, it doesn't automatically transfer into approval into the UK. So at this point, because the review process in the US and in the UK is different, so at this moment they're just discussing post-market arrangements, so for devices which are already approved and they're already on the market. Another very important topic here was about the amendment fees. So the current amendment fee is £343 for each amendment that we submit to MHRA, and we've been informed that fee is now scrapped, which is great news, because we have to, when you make changes in your protocol and any other documents, you have to submit amendment to MHRA, and every time you have to pay a fee. So the fact that they scrap these fees is really great news, particularly for smaller companies and startups, where they, for them, the budget is quite limited. So all these fees will have an effect. Another important thing from the medical device presentation was about the opportunities to have a waiver for the setup for the fees, for the regulatory fees with MHRA. So if you have a startup company and you're looking to set up, let's say, your first clinical trial in the UK, and you're a UK-based company, that's very important to remember. You need to be a UK-based company. Then you can apply for waiver, and these fees, regulatory fees for the review, will be waived. At the time of the conference, when we were discussing this, there was an ongoing discussion if it's worth keeping that scheme for the waivers for the fees. But then I discovered later on, like in the last week, that actually this scheme's been extended, I think, at least for another 1 year or even longer. So they're trying it's like a pilot, they're trying to see how that works. And while there's an argument that for many small companies, they have regulatory fees included in their budget when they raise funding, the problem is you don't get always the whole funding that you need. So if you can save something from somewhere and invest it more into the manufacturing of your device, of course, that's always welcome. So we'll see how that goes, but that was a very positive feedback and a very positive review of what's happening in the medical devices. Now, the next presentation was about drug clinical trials from HRA and MHRA, and I'm kind of going to merge the two sessions together because they were kind of linked together. So the one of the big metrics that we have in the UK at the moment is to try and set up clinical trials within 150 days. So when we say 150 days, we mean from submission of the clinical trial until we have first patient in on a clinical trial. So that's what they're aiming to reduce the setup time to 150 days. And very interesting, I just read this morning that they've managed for some studies to reduce that setup time to 122 days, which is really positive. This is really good news. So as much as we can reduce the setup time, of course, that's brilliant, and we should work and try to achieve this one. The other important update is related to the new clinical trial regulation, and it's about the notifiable and non-notifiable clinical trials. So MHRA have actually released, I saw it today on my updates, they have released a new checklist to help people decide if their trial is notifiable or not notifiable. What is different in the new regulation is some clinical trials are not notifiable. So if you have a drug which is already approved on the market and you're using it within the indication, so it's basically post-market study, then you don't need approval from MHRA. You can just go to ethics committee. So similar case, if you have a drug which is approved on the market, but you're using it for different indication, which is not approved, but you have data available even from literature to support that it's safe, then you still may avoid having to submit to MHRA. And the third case, which is very interesting, is about clinical trials which are approved by European Medicine Agency and US FDA. So basically, if you have a clinical trial which is approved by European Medicine Agency, and all the documents and all the protocol and everything is the same, and you submit it, then you won't need to get an approval from MHRA. And it's the same with the FDA, with that difference, because there are some documents which are different for FDA and from UK and for FDA. So in the UK we have investigational medicinal product dossier, which is not applicable for FDA. So what they're saying is, if your clinical trial is approved by US FDA, it's the same protocol and the manufacturing is the same of the drug, then this means that you might be able to continue without having to submit to MHRA for approval. So this is some kind of recognition procedure between the different regulators, which I think is fantastic news, and it could reduce the overall setup of clinical trials if you don't have to go through MHRA and do all that. So that was very important update. In terms of approval metrics, so MHRA provided very interesting insight on their latest approval metrics for clinical trials, which is reduced to 50 days. So according to the regulation is 60 days. That's the timeline for approving new clinical trials in the UK. And they, on their metrics, they show that it's the average approval time is about 50 days, which is really good. So they're a lot quicker than they expected. Another few things that I want to mention here is the joint scientific advice between the UK MHRA and NICE. So for those who don't know, NICE are the price regulator in the UK, and they offer this new scientific advice. So if you're looking to place your drug on the market in the UK, it will, and you don't have marketing authorization yet, so you can submit basically in parallel to MHRA and to NICE, which are the price regulator, and you kind of not just get your drug approved, but you agree on cost of this drug, and you can get it quicker to the patients to have access to it. Because the idea is once it's approved by MHRA and NICE together, you can basically directly place it on the market, which is brilliant news, and it will be covered by the healthcare system in the UK. Now that is a tricky one because it requires a lot of resources to be able to do that, the submission to the agencies. So maybe not really suitable for small companies, but for big companies, that's definitely something they can explore. Another important update was about the recognition procedure with Singapore. So if you have drugs which are approved in Singapore, there's a fast track process that these drugs could be approved in the UK as well. So this is a new process, and it's collaboration between the UK MHRA and the agency in Singapore, the regulators. So that's another important one, particularly for those who have drugs developed in Asia and want to bring them to the European market, to the UK. And feasibility services is another topic that was discussed. Here, basically, we have a streamlined process of feasibility. It's a system where you submit the information, what kind of sites you need. You provide some draft protocol or blinded protocol, and then there's a centralized system and service to provide you with sites which are interested, hospitals which are interested to conduct the clinical trial. It's a free service, and it works quite well. We're using it regularly. Of course, it depends on hospital capacities. Sometimes it could take longer to get responses, but if you have to contact hospitals on your own, you're not going to get it any quicker. I can promise that. That's the experience. And the last session, the last 3 sessions for that first day was about patient involvement. And here we had 3 different presenters. They were talking about involving patients in the design of the clinical trials, of the importance of considering patients' lifestyle and many things when you design clinical trial in a way to support their not only participation in the clinical trial, but really retention so that they could be treated long term. And here, so I don't bore you too much, I'll leave Lydia to say a few words on the patient involvement and what's her takeaway on this session.
Thanks, Olga. I think it's great to see that the regulators are pushing more for inclusion and diversity in trial design, and also in the regulations that are governing the trials themselves. And I think overall it seems like the focus on patient involvement is creating better design trials because they're being designed a lot more efficiently, and recruitment's being increased because they're taking into account patient experiences. And I think sort of in turn as well, sort of on the flip side of that, the trials are actually becoming a more positive experience for participants, which is something that they talked about as well. And another thing they discussed was how people-centred research is being extended to research involving staff, particularly NHS sites. And that's something else that's helping to improve research because by understanding their perspectives, that can also help run the trials a lot better as well. So taking into account how staff work around trial protocols and things like that. And I think the patient-centred aspect was kind of reflected in the talk after that, which was about the psychology of joining a trial, and like the decision funnel. So that was kind of all of the factors that sort of come into the process of a patient deciding whether they want to take part in the trial. And I think without that understanding, we wouldn't really have the practical tools which the sites are applying to improve trial recruitment. So it really emphasises the importance of trial design that's centred around the patient, and having that insight.
That's brilliant, Lydia. Yeah, exactly. We definitely need the involvement of patients in designing a good protocols. But I think we also need to have understanding that sometimes the regulators want specific type of data, so that's something we cannot avoid, and that's something that creates complexities in all clinical trials. So even though we try our very best to make them be acceptable and workable for patients, sometimes we have to consider what is required from the regulatory point of view. And of course you can always improve your design and not have PK samples on Sunday, for example, right, Lydia? So I hope you agree with this.
Yeah.
As we do sometimes. So we can think of that kind of details, just to make it easier for the patients and for the nurses collecting samples and things like that. There's definitely a room for improvement on this. But yeah, patients' involvement is important, and also providing feedback to the patients at the end of the clinical trial with the results. That's also a very important part. So the next, the final session for the day was roundtable discussions. I actually found these quite interesting, and there were a few discussions on the different tables. I was involved in the how to improve the clinical trial setup discussion. Lydia was talking about trial master file and how to make things digital. Now, I'm not going to go into all these topics because it will be a never-ending rant. So I think I'll just stay away from them. We might record a separate episode just to discuss the roundtable discussions and our feedback and what we think it could be improved. But for the moment, I'll just leave them like that. And then that was my first day. I'll leave now Lydia to talk about the second day, which was also a very interesting one from what I saw on the agenda. So Lydia, over to you.
Thank you, Olga. Yes, I attended the second day of the conference as well. And the second day started with a talk about digital innovation in Alzheimer's disease, and that focused on patient electronic medical records and how access to anonymised records can be used for research. But this is kind of limited by a lack of standardisation that's currently in the records. So because there's not really much consensus across sites about how information about patients is recorded, this can make it really difficult to extract and actually use that data. And this is something that we see very regularly in our monitoring aspect of our job. But one of the solutions that they suggested for this was using an AI model, so something called a natural language processing model, to interpret the medical records and extract and code specific symptoms. So in relation to Alzheimer's disease, this was kind of using things like health scores and, like I said, like symptoms, so it would extract like keywords, and any treatments given for mild cognitive impairment, which is the precursor to Alzheimer's. So these kind of models have a potential to extract quite large amounts of data and do like large scale robust analysis, but also reduce the site burden of doing all the screening procedures and collecting the data. And it's something that sounded very promising. So the next talk after that was about the Our Future Health project. So this is an early detection and prevention research project aimed at recruiting 5 million people. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard of that. I've had letters through the door about trying to recruit people for it. So what this consists of is baseline screening questionnaires about lifestyles and demographics, and then a blood test to collect genotype data. So it's a big collaborative project between the NHS, charities and private companies. So the company that's doing the genetic analysis is Biogen, they're the company that they're collaborating with. And yeah, so this is kind of obviously collecting a lot of health research data, but it's also provides the participants with genetic and non-genetic risk information based on the information that they give as part of the trial. And it also gives them the opportunity to be recalled for future research projects that they might be eligible for. And yeah, so the talk was really interesting because already they've got a really impressive cohort of data, even though they haven't finished collecting or recruiting all of the patients yet. And it had pretty good diversity across age, gender, ethnicity, income, so all those background things. So it seems like the research that they're going to be doing is probably quite applicable and like generalisable. And it sounds like it's going to be the foundation of a lot of future research projects going forward, and really help connect researchers with participants. So, for example, identifying people who might be at high risk of rare diseases based on the genetic data, and helping to find treatments and look at outcomes for those rare diseases, which is obviously something that's super important because those trials in particular can be really hard to recruit to. So if they've already got that information on file, that can make that a lot easier.
Yeah, if I can add something here. So actually, this is something that FDA are also very keen on. So I read recently the same. So FDA are looking to have some kind of database or information where they can use particularly for rare diseases, because for rare disease, it's so hard to find these patients. It could take years if you have to recruit them in a standard clinical trial. So that could give them like additional option if they can have access to that data and analyze it and help them understand more about the disease. And they can then use that data in silico models as well. So it's really critical and important one. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's fine. That actually leads on nicely to the talk that was after that was about identifying precision cohorts using AI. So using that genetic data to and applying AI models to identify abnormalities or characterize disease. So I feel like those kind of two things are very linked to being used in conjunction with AI. Necessarily feasible, even though they're doing it large scale. So I think the kind of projects that are using precision cohorts are going to be used kind of on a smaller scale by the sounds of it. And yeah, it seemed like they were only going to be recruiting people who would benefit from being identified as part of those cohorts. So, for example, if they're experiencing a lot of symptoms from like a rare disease or something, further genetic testing might provide more insight to help manage those symptoms. So yeah, it doesn't seem like it's going to be rolled out massively in terms of the AI applications. Sorry.
No. That's very interesting, and I think this is something that many other regions around the world are keen to collect that data and be able to do this analysis and potentially identify patients in new treatments and so on. So I think having that data is important, and definitely it could be AI could be beneficial here if you have the correct model. You can definitely have some very interesting results and opportunity to learn more about particularly rare diseases. Yeah, I agree with this. Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see like how these sort of areas of research crop up more and more in future for sure. The talk after this was about site digitalisation, which is something that was also discussed a little bit on the first day. So it was about a collaborative project run by the NHS between the University Hospital Southampton and the University Hospitals of Leicester, and it focused in particular on the electronic investigator site file and the kind of benefits of implementing those over paper ISFs, which again is something that we deal with a lot in our job. So some of the main benefits that they talked about was improved regulatory compliance and audit readiness. So being able to have automated systems that might flag if something's missing, or having something that implements a standardised structure so that you can make sure all of the necessary documents are there. Another benefit was having like a unified system, which is easy for collaboration between sites and sponsors. So being able to all have access to one file in an electronic space. And this is kind of part of an ongoing plan within the NHS to digitalise a lot of their processes. So it's promising to hear that this is kind of happening, even if it does seem to be happening slowly. And I think we find, at least from our perspective, that digital trial documents have a lot of advantages over paper and tend to be kind of easier to use. We always seem to kind of prefer or nudge sponsors towards having electronic versions of files, particularly makes things easier for things like remote monitoring for our job anyway. As I say, it's reassuring to hear that the NHS is moving towards that direction. And obviously one concern about this, I think somebody asked it in the question session at the end, was about the security of data when you're storing it in an electronic environment. And this was touched on in the next talk that came after this, that was about secure data environments. So data security, as we know, is really important for protecting patient confidentiality and complying with regulations, safeguarding data, and maintaining data integrity. And these are all required in clinical trials for them to be GCP and GDPR compliant. So data environment security comes into all different aspects and stages of the trials. So, for example, you might have physical security measures at the sites, like locked cabinets and things like that, the physical records. And then you also have like cybersecurity practices for storing electronic data. So that would be something that would have to be implemented for that electronic site file. And some of the discussion was from a CRO perspective, which was obviously really interesting to see how monitors view data security and the kind of issues that they come into contact with at the sites when they're doing monitoring. So some of the high-risk scenarios that they recommended for CROs to look out for that I thought were interesting to take away from this were things like sites using invalidated tools or spreadsheets, using unsecured shared drives for storing files, big focus on paper source documents because they're not always safe in the digital documents. Viewing audit trails as only an IT concern when, as a matter of fact, it's something that should be monitored by monitors and the other site staff as well. And another thing to look out for is using shared logins or passwords at sites. And they said this is particularly an issue where if the team is really small. That's something for us to look out for, as well as making sure everyone's using their assigned login to make sure that data is kept securely and that people who shouldn't have access to the data aren't accessing it.
That's brilliant, Lydia. By the way, yeah, I completely agree. And actually, the US hospitals are way ahead of us. They use electronic site files. It's basically they have their own system, like a SharePoint or somewhere where you can drop the documents and they have access to them. We don't have that in the UK. Unfortunately, in many cases, the sponsor has to provide access to the sites, and then they take the documents and store them on some internal network and so on. So it's a bit messy one, I have to say. But definitely, if you think about it, all our documents we use in clinical trials, they're all electronic. So we don't have anything on paper. So we need to, if we have a paper site file, we need to print things to file them so they are in their normal state is electronic. We have to print them specifically for the site file. But that's been a challenge. I understand the concerns about security and so on. But I think in terms of patient-informed consents, I'm more in favor of keeping these on paper. If they're on paper, then it makes sense to keep them on paper at the hospital and not scan them and put them in the site file. It's different if you have electronic informed consent, then it's apparently stored in some system somewhere, and so that's fine. But I'm generally a big fan of the idea that we move towards using electronic site file where people have access to it, rather than going looking for paper somewhere stored in some cupboard under someone's desk and so on, and then where is my folder with correspondence, have you seen it, things like that that was something routine in the past. I would like not to see them anymore, but unfortunately with paper is quite tricky because you can lose it. As we know, you can lose paper. So yeah, that was very good one. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Lydia, to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. It's nice to hear your input on it as well. And yeah, I think, like you said, the site file, I'm glad that's kind of been prioritised, because obviously it can have so many documents in it. So when it is paper, it causes all kinds of issues if things go missing, or even just having worked at the sites, if you're sent to go and get something from a site file, that can take up quite a lot of time if you have to go and find the file and then find, sometimes there's 7 site files for one trial, finding the specific one, and then actually going through and finding the document, if it's even there. So I think having everything on an electronic system would be easier, and I'm sure a lot of people would agree with that.
And someone always have some small tiny folder somewhere on their desk where they keep things and they're not actually filed. So yeah, we know all that story.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, the next talk was about the updated GCP guidelines as of last year, so the ICH E6 R3. And this talk focused on the updates which were to do with risk proportionality in clinical trials practice. So this means using a risk-based approach to designing, planning and conducting clinical trials. So identifying factors that are important for trial quality and the risks that are associated with them, and then implementing or premeditating the risk mitigation strategies that are needed, and keeping these proportionate to the importance of the data being collected, the participant safety and the reliability of the results. So in practice, this might look like dissecting protocols and identifying factors within the protocols that are critical to the trial quality. So as we know, data is often one of these factors that plays a big part in the quality of the trial. But there might also be other factors that tend to differ across trials. So the assessment of risk has to be kind of done on a case-by-case basis. It's not a one-size-fits-all. As we know, it's also a continued process that needs to be practiced across all trial stages, so not just in the trial design. It should also be continuing happening as the trial is running and in the closeout process as we gain more information. So this might look like implementing a monitoring plan which has full source data verification versus a targeted review, so not 100% SDB. It would be only looking at particular safety data that's important for what that trial is trying to investigate, and also depending on the risk to the patients as well. And I think overall it seems like something we obviously already seen being implemented in trials. I mean, you would obviously hope when the focus is on patient safety that these things are being considered, but I think it is also good that the guidelines have been updated to put an emphasis on this to make sure it is being implemented when trials are being designed and conducted, and to also clarify what risk mitigation should look like with those kind of examples that
we don't have constant battles. Why are you doing this? Because I think that's important. Well, no, you have to do everything. And I think that's very much we have to move away from this, sorry to interrupt you, this type of thinking that you need to do 100% of the 100%. And we need to really think about what is critical for the clinical trial. And this is something that the regulators have been talking about for a long time. Like MHRA, that's been their discussion topic for a long time, telling people, if you're doing a PK sample studies, your priority data will be the PK samples, and they're collected at a specific time point. So that's what you need to monitor. So other things which might not necessarily be relevant, you don't need to put that much time on them. So this is what they've been saying. But now it's really good that this is part of the ACIH and GCP. And if someone comes back to you, you can tell them, well, I've done the risk assessment. I can do it this way because. I think that's a very important thing, because in the past with the old form, you could be challenged. They can say, wow, GCP says you have to do like 100% of everything. So I think from that point of view, it's very important we have this update, and gives us a lot more flexibility in research.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it seems like it's going to help improve the efficiency of trials, but also keeping the focus on the patient safety and acknowledging that obviously not all trials are the same, so they shouldn't, all of the risk mitigation shouldn't be treated the same. Yeah. It should really be based on what the trial is looking at. So finally, on the second day, the last talk was about responsible use of AI, which is obviously very relevant given what we've discussed already, and AI seemed to come into a lot of the questions and a lot of the talks across the 2 days, so it was kind of a nice thing to finish on. So they started talking about some of the uses of AI in clinical research, which I'm not going to repeat because we've already kind of discussed some of that. But interestingly, they talked about some of the regulations across GCP, as well as the European Medicines Agency and the FDA guidelines about the use of AI in clinical research. So things like, if you are going to use AI, ensuring that procedures within the trials are human-centric, adapting the use of AI to fit participant characteristics and trial design, establishing the credibility of an AI model in the context that it's being used in the trial, and ultimately they kind of emphasise that the investigator, if the AI is being used at the site as part of the trials, the investigator is still responsible for maintaining oversight for the use of AI in trial activities, as they would be for any human activities, for any staff at the site. So I think the investigator and anyone using it, they sort of advise to be very vigilant about things like bias and hallucinations, because as we all know, it's not 100% correct all the time, and we can't take everything it says as gospel. And I think another good thing they talked about was some kind of practical tips. So it's all well and good having these regulations and recommendations, but they giving people sort of guidance on how to actually implement this was really helpful. So some of the tips they gave were having an expert review all AI suggested designs, declaring where AI is used, particularly for maintaining records and using any AI processes. And then also if you're using kind of like a language model like ChatGPT or something, using counterfactual prompts, so asking things like what are the limitations of findings, things like that, so you're kind of challenging it and not just using it to kind of spit out facts. It's kind of encouraging you to also be to kind of think about the other side of things as well. But yeah, it was really refreshing to hear them talk about some of the limitations of AI, because obviously the overall view of it across the 2 days was very positive, and how to kind of address those limitations practically. Because I think sometimes AI is seen as this kind of magical technology that can solve everything without considering some of those risks of relying on it too much. But I think, yeah, me and you, Olga, was kind of talking about these things, when people were sort of singing all the praises of AI, we were kind of I guess being a bit more realistic about it. So it was nice to see, I guess, that being acknowledged in this talk at the end.
And I think it's very critical to remember this, because I also use ChatGPT. Sometimes I need information, and I happen to need some information about import and so on recently, and I use ChatGPT. I need produce some information for me. When I asked for the links where the information was taken from, it turned out was from regulations from MHRA which were withdrawn. So if I didn't ask for the links and if I didn't check, I could have just assumed that the information sent to me is correct. So I think that's a very good example, to see that you actually need to check. You can't just 100% rely on something. The other thing is, I think physicians will really like to take responsibility for AI designing their protocols. I think they'll be very keen on that one. I would imagine, physicians would want to make sure, because when you're designing the protocol, it's very critical that you design it according to the standard of care of the country. So it's not just simply using literature or whatever's online, but really know what is the standard of care and what is done at the clinical practice. So you definitely need a physician or other people who are involved in treating patients to look into this and say, okay, this is workable, this is what we do in our clinic. Because that's one of the biggest challenges, basically. People design some protocols that no one can follow. It's just if they're not aligned with the clinical practice, it's really difficult to recruit patients and to actually produce any reliable data. So I think that was a really good overview of this conference, and we've learned a lot from it. It was very interesting to attend. Thank you, Lydia, for your time and for your input and discussion. And thank you to our listeners. Thank you.